everyone, and welcome to another Scots Whay Hae podcast. And today I'm joined by filmmaker Ciaran Lyons to talk about the film Tummy Monster, which was at the GFT recently and is about to go around the UK. Hello, Ciaran.
Hello, thanks for having me.
It's a pleasure. And before we get into the film itself, how was the showing at the GFT, which was a couple of days ago?
Yeah, it was great actually. We played there at the film festival in 2024, which
Yeah.
had a really good response there. Sold out a few screenings, got an extra one added. But this one coming back after having, played all around the world and stuff, I think it just felt way more relaxed. I
Mm.
think sometimes when people go and see a film in a film festival, it's a bit like we really don't know what we're getting. People, I think film festival audiences, they are very committed to supporting all types of films, but there is this sense like, is this a proper film? Whereas I think that screening, everyone was so much more relaxed. Um, so it's like when you're actually doing these commercial screenings, people are like, okay, it's a proper film. And it was honestly, it was probably like it was the most fun screening I think we've had. Like people were just howling with laughter. Yeah, it was great, really fun.
Because it's a film which is a real assault on the senses. And as we
Mhm.
said just before we started recording, to see it in a proper audience must be something else.
Yeah, I think actually it does. You might think it seems like a small film, but I think when you see it in a cinema, it's like it's got this really amazing immersive soundtrack. That my brother's the composer and the sound designer Willie Makeman's done an amazing job. That it's like it's just it totally envelops you, and it has this very otherworldly, like choir horror soundtrack, which I think people are quite surprised by. Sometimes people see it online first and they see it in the cinema and think, whoa, this actually feels like something else. So
Yeah.
yeah. And also,
So
yeah, having the crowd around you reacting, I think that's also a big part of the fun because it's a surprising film with
yeah, no,
you get crowd reactions for
absolutely.
sure.
And how do you describe Tummy Monster to people? How do you yeah, tell people, oh, this is what the film's like? Because it must be quite a difficult one to explain.
It is a difficult one to explain, to be honest, because there's, like there is a very surprising thing happens, relatively early on in the film, which goes on to be a huge part of what your experience of this film is and what makes it unique. And I'm not I'm a filmmaker. I'm not a marketing person, and I haven't, to be honest, found like the perfect way to describe what that is. And I think that's what's good about this cinema tour is that you're kind of building word of mouth of like people saying, I can't really describe this film, but you have to see it. So I guess I've often ended up just describing what the setup is. Um, but I think that for a pure experience, it's good audiences don't know what's coming, you know.
I think that's probably true. And actually, if people go online, they can not only find the trailer, but they can see some of the reviews of it, which are kind
Yeah.
of along those lines.
Yeah.
Like, oh wow, I've watched this and I don't know if I can describe it to you.
Yeah. I mean, there are, if you really go digging, you can find out what that strange thing is. But I think until you actually experience that, particularly in a cinema with another audience, it's kind of hard to describe what that is. So yeah.
And am I right in saying this is your debut feature?
It's my debut feature film, yeah.
Yeah. So why was this a story you wanted to tell, if that's the right way to put it?
Um, I would be lying if I said that this particular story is the story that I've been carrying around always wanting to tell. But I think that's an interesting thing about, practicing as a storyteller, that when you when you do take on a story and you commit to it and you work into it and you layer into it, you actually find that you find surprises within it, and actually you find depth which you might not expect to be there. Because I'm not a tattoo person, I'm not someone who is particularly preoccupied with the idea of selfie culture. But strangely, a lot of the things which I am preoccupied with, by really committing to this story and trying to make it and tell the best story you possibly can around this initial concept. Yeah, I end up like being surprised by what's in it. And I think that's what probably motivated me to for this to be my feature film, like my first feature film, was the fact that I wanted to do well. I knew I was going to. I knew I was going to, in order to make my first feature film, it was going to be something that I would have to put together myself.
Yeah.
Um, it's notoriously difficult at that stage in your career to get someone to back you, financially. And I think that there is a way of making a film for a lot less money than people say you need to make a film, that you need to make a film. Because I've made loads of music videos and short films, and I thought, I think we can do it, but I need the right concept. And this concept, um, is when that kind of like came to me, then I just something clicked, and I felt like, yeah, I can do this. And this concept it's strange enough and it's original enough. It needs to be, I know what I'm looking to do needs to be shot in a very short period of time in order, like that's where the cost comes from in terms of paying cast, crew, and things. And this concept fits. It's appropriate for this story to be told in a, by means of a shoot that's very, very condensed. And I think it did actually end up really working for what the story is. So,
So you almost take the budgetary constrictions in this case and turn it into a positive, not just the time period, but the number of people involved, the setting, all of those things. Does that come into
yeah,
consideration?
yeah, I think so. I think that's the way I kind of when I think about like creative writing or filmmaking, there's almost like two parts of yourself. There's the dreamer, and there's the logistics person,
Yeah.
and you have to move back and forth between them, because if it's just the dreamer, things don't get done. And you can come up with ideas that are interesting, um, but that needs this other part of yourself to, almost have conversation with it to say like, yeah, but this needs to actually be brought into reality. Like, how are we going to do this? So I think having defined parameters of how this thing can be made is actually very, very helpful. And, I knew what resources I had at my disposal. And so it really helps guide certain decisions, and it makes your decision making quite I don't know, efficient and clear. But there's always a million possibilities,
Mm.
even within a very tight within tight parameters. There are so many ways that you can do things. So as long as you get your imagination going, um, this our limitations don't actually have to be creatively limiting, I think.
It's a conversation I think that happens right across the arts. It's one thing to write the book and then people have to promote it and all of those
Yeah.
things, which are perhaps not things that they might necessarily be comfortable with. But that idea is one of the kind of, just as you're talking, it's kind of at the crux of the film in a way, this battle between being creative and being responsible. Is that the film?
Yeah, no, it is in there. I think, so I've not talked that much about what happens in it, but there's this very narcissistic Scottish tattoo artist who's kind of like a bit of a legend on the local scene, but his life is obviously a disaster. And I think it's fair to say we don't go into it too much. It's just in a sort of thing there in the background. You get the sense that this guy is like in love with the idea of his own talent,
Mm.
and sort of believes that part and parcel with that, probably his life should be a disastrous mess, like likes that sort of um image of creativity. This isn't the plot, this is just like
Yeah,
who that guy is.
yeah, yeah.
And then someone shows up in the middle of the night who's like a world famous, like the as big as they get pop star, shows up in his tattoo studio in the middle of the night, while this guy, the Scottish tattoo artist, is living there secretly because his life's a mess. And he then hosts this pop star, tries to pretend to be cool and credible, hide the fact that he's actually, a total, screw up. And yeah, I think that there is this theme in the film of how this main character wants to like the fantasy image he has of himself and how that's kind of deconstructed over the film. And that sounds like quite sort of cerebral and intellectual, but actually the film in itself is incredibly simple. We do not have those kind of conversations I'm saying now. That does not happen in the film, so don't let yourself be put off. That's not in there.
But it is interesting when you're talking about making the film that I'm not saying it's the same thing there at all, but he's
Yeah.
also got questions about being cool and staying young and all of those
Uh-huh.
kind of obsessions that come through too.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I was kind of, so that as I was talking before, the story doesn't necessarily, it seems like these kind of superficially quite unappealing characters who are interested in things that aren't necessarily on the surface of it my interests. But something I thought was, yeah, was interesting to get into it, this tattoo artist, and he's like really, he's created for himself an inescapable identity,
Mm.
partly like through the fact he's covered himself in tattoos. And I think you know, sometimes people who create a visual identity, particularly like the goth identity, I think people find it quite inescapable. Like it's a self-betrayal if you ever let go of that identity. Um, and there's this kind of idea of like Peter Pan syndrome,
Yeah.
of like the sort of charming and talented, usually young man, and how they progress into life, and how what can at some points in their life be assets and um, can seem like almost like strengths of character when you're in your youth. If they don't learn how to adapt those into the next part of their life, they can become incredibly destructive people
Mm.
and self-destructive as well.
Yeah. And he has got, again, he has got responsibilities and that side of things, the clash between those tensions, if you like, you kind of drive the film forward.
Yeah, absolutely. Because, he gets involved, he gets embroiled, and we're getting towards spoilers here, but he gets
Yes.
embroiled in this incredibly idiotic game with the pop star, which is basically to prove to himself that he's as good as this pop star, basically. Um, and I think that it's a recognizable thing, probably for not necessarily in all cultures, I think, but like this like total pig-headedness, like not backing down from an argument. I think that's the thing that a lot of Scottish people definitely recognize, if not necessarily in themselves, but in people that they know.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure that it is as prevalent in some cultures. I think I've shared this with writers I know from all over Europe. And some it's very clear, and some people are like, so is this just a game that people play in Scotland? Am I meant to know about this? And it's like mystifying, but I think yeah, sorry, I've kind of gone off on one there, but I think there's
And
recognized.
that is really interesting. And you said it's been at the GFT recently. It was at the Glasgow Film Festival and was really well received.
Mhm.
And it's kind of your hometown, isn't it? I mean, you're Glasgow based, is that right?
Yeah, I've lived here for now about 18 years.
So
So
I think, and I'm Glasgow based as well, I think there is something recognizable about that. But there's also, we'll talk about the cast in a moment, but that performance, which is at times a mix of a anger, but wanting to be seen as doing the right thing, and not the right thing, but to be accepted by
yeah,
there's all sorts of different emotions going on through this simple repeated gesture that he has to do.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. Um, yeah, so that's Lorne, who's the lead actor, Lorne MacDonald. And yeah, I think it's no coincidence he's playing a Scottish character in this film. And it does feel like somebody who I know, who I think a lot of people will feel like they know. And it's interesting to see that type of person get into conflict with, this cooler than cool international like American superstar, basically. Um, because sometimes he gives as good as he gets.
Oh yeah,
Sometimes, you know,
yeah.
and that's an interesting thing in the film. Like, I don't think you're ever thinking Lauren's character tales. You're not thinking, oh, this is a good guy. We're just totally behind him. But he isn't without redeeming qualities. And I think the way in which you can at some points get behind him, despite him being quite deeply flawed, I think that's to do with the humanity that Lauren
Yeah.
invests in with. Like he's playing it in a way where he believes he's right, and
Yeah, and again, I won't go anywhere near spoilers, hopefully, but he does kind of almost have self-revelation as things unravel, as things go on.
yes, that's a big that's a big part of the journey of the film, which hopefully I think, that does resonate with some people. I think some people find that part quite satisfying.
And
Um,
so you've got, I mean, it's basically a two-hander, isn't it? The kind of two-header, if you like.
yeah, there's two lead characters who are, in a battle with each other, essentially. There are other supporting characters, but that's the main focus of the drama for sure.
And was that also a necessity of budget, or did you think, oh, this is the story I want to tell in this way?
I think it fits the story, absolutely. I think, as I was mentioning before, there's a whole world of stories which could be told, which I would love to tell, and hopefully at some point I will tell other stories which have different limitations and parameters on them. But at this point, there is a good story to be told that is that is small, and I think it is interesting to see because, like, there's films out there on all sorts of different scales, and sometimes you can watch films where there's like dozens of characters going all over the world and like flying all through the sky and trying to save the world. And people watch it and it's like 3 hours long. It's like, this isn't very engaging. Like, it
Yeah,
genuinely isn't very engaging. And you don't feel like anything that they're doing actually has real stakes. And it's interesting to see with this is like,
yeah.
yes, it sounds on paper like it's small, but as a viewer and an audience member, not for everyone, because films aren't like that. Different people have different responses, but there are people in the audience who really do connect a lot with this emotionally, and it is a powerful experience for them.
Of
And
course, there are real stakes as
yeah,
you develop. You realize just what they are, absolutely, and the
yeah,
recognizable ones as well. I think you're right.
and I think that's an important part of film, and it sometimes gets lost in blockbusters that you don't actually need the world to be at peril in order for us to be emotionally connected with what's happening. Um, so I think it's really not. I wasn't making this film and thinking like, oh, I wish that we could be, you know, driving around in a helicopter or bringing in loads of extra characters. I think the story has power and it's small, and that's just what it is.
Yep, absolutely. And did you have influences that you can talk about for this piece? Is there anything that you think, oh yeah, that kind of fed into it?
Um, I think there are some filmmakers in terms of their filmmaking approach, which you can kind of look to, which I think obvious ones, contemporary filmmakers like the Safdie brothers and Sean Baker, they have a way of treating performance, I
Mhm.
suppose, how they shoot that and how they facilitate it, which when I'm going into this, I'm tuning into that. For people who are kind of like I don't know, like film heads or filmmakers, like you're you're running takes. Like we didn't have loads of time because obviously we're on a very tight schedule, but it's the difference between like sometimes you'll run like the more conventional way to do it is like you're asking your actors to create a little bit of space around each of their individual lines, um, so that they're all clean, and then you speed it up in the edit,
Right.
particularly if you're shooting back and forth between singles. But the way I was usually trying to do it, and the dialogue is written in such a way so that the characters are actually encouraged to interrupt each other and step on each other's lines, and that they're dictating the timing in the moment of what feels natural. And sound sound recorders will kind of say like, I think you need to do that one again because we don't have a clear path to that line.
Right.
And we would prioritize getting the scene to the point where it felt we were doing everything we could to try and make the scene feel real for the actors rather than thinking about the technical side of things. And then we would potentially just like, as we were moving on, because we were on such a tight budget, such a tight schedule, we might pick up just a line to ADR it or to just drop it in while we're not looking at that character. And you'll often see that in like the Safdie brothers films where, I'm thinking of like in Uncut Gems where they're in the like Howie's jewelry store and they're just talking all over the top of each other. And you can't even really tell what the hell's going on, but it gives the scene so much life and energy. Um, and I think it was like having the confidence that there's enough clarity in this scene that the characters can do that. It's not happening all the time, but things like that, and you're tuning into how are we going to manage that in terms of like the technical side of things, because the priority was to try and make this as natural as possible for the actors.
And there's quite a lot of close-ups, and you can
Yeah.
see the differing emotions on your actors' faces at times. There's a couple of examples I can think of, particularly where just what seems like a simple sentence, but the emotion in the face really kind of comes through.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's a similar thing, those kind of filmmakers will often shoot on longer lenses so that they can get back from the cast so that the cast can get lost in the moment. You're trying to shoot in locations that feel the actors can lose themselves in it. And it's not that you turn the camera around 180 degrees and you're suddenly looking at like a bank of lights and a load of producers drinking coffee. It's like it's 360. This space is
Yeah.
real, you know.
And
So
how did you come to cast it? Did you know who you wanted right from the start?
I didn't know who I wanted right from the start. When I originally wrote the first pass of the script, I imagined the lead character Tails being older, just
Right.
because it was even more tragic and disastrous.
Yeah.
And like if you see the film, the idea of him being like an extra 10 years older would make this film brutal. Um, but when I started looking at people, I actually thought, this really does need lightness and energy and comedy. And when I saw Lauren and Beats,
Mm.
um, so it was something different to what I originally imagined. But I thought like if we can get this guy, this film works, or that character certainly works anyway. It's not what I necessarily my original idea. And then I had a conversation with him after his agent showed it to him. So it was a straight approach saying, if we get along, we have a conversation, we're getting along, we can talk about this, then yeah, the role's yours. And the way he spoke to me about it and his ideas of what this character could become, and between the two of us, we adapted it around him because as I said, it was originally written for somebody older, and we layered in some new stuff. And he's now, he's credited as a co-writer because we were collaborating on that process as well. Yeah, that then added a whole layer to that. Once Lauren was on board, because he is um, he's on the way up, but he's a respected actor within the kind of film community. And I think his name being attached to it really helped when approaching other agents to give this film a kind of a bit of extra credibility because it is it's so small. So that helped us get access from the agents to like a little bit more engagement and support with that, which was how we found Orlando. I think this was his first. It's certainly his first leading feature role, but I think it might have been his first feature role since starting with his agent. And yeah, we were very like that was a really great discovery for sure. I mean, he's flying now. I think we're going to see him in a lot of stuff over the next couple of years. But yeah, and then again, Michael. that was also just someone who I found just through trawling through hundreds and hundreds of people, and I just offered him the role straight off. So
That's who plays Truth.
that's who plays Truth. Yeah,
And again, a small part comparatively, but he's fantastic in it.
he's brilliant.
The role he plays, you absolutely believe that is the role he would play.
Yeah, he's absolutely brilliant in it, and like there's depth and subtlety to how he plays that role. He's not just like he's not just the sort of security or there's a lot of depth to what he brings to that. So yeah,
Yeah,
I was just very, very fortunate with who I got for the film for sure.
but what you said earlier, it's really interesting because we were saying that when you showed it at the GFT, there was a lot of laughter and there is a lot of comedy in the film, dark comedy, but comedy
Yeah,
nonetheless.
dark
And
comedy, yeah.
people really got it. But that decision, and I guess a lot of decisions must do this, to not have the original older character, which might have pushed it over into tragedy of all kinds,
Yeah,
that's really
absolutely.
interesting.
Yeah. No, it is interesting, and also the casting of the pop star, his name is Tommy in it. Like there is another film in there because there was a person who I came very close to casting them. Um and they were great, but they were much more like they seemed like like a pop star who was fresh off the Disney Channel
Right.
and was just in the process of becoming like a bit of an impish bad boy. And he would have been a good bit smaller than Lauren,
Mm.
and he would have seemed much more like a pixie, you know,
Yeah.
and could also been an interesting film. But it's and this is the thing, like casting has a huge impact on what a film ultimately becomes. And then it happens and it feels like it could never have happened any other way.
Yeah, I think that's right because all three of them are perfect for the
They are
role.
perfect, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And can we talk a little bit about the soundtrack because it really adds to the atmosphere,
Yeah.
the tension.
Yeah. So the soundtrack is actually that's composed by my brother, Chris Lyons.
Uh,
So we worked, I mean, I'm not a musician, but he's worked on a few of my short films and we have figured out how we can work together. And so we did work on that together, and yeah, that was a wonderful experience. He is like he's a musician in loads of different, very widely different styles of bands that play, all the time in Edinburgh. So he knows a lot of musicians, and there were some of the pieces were very, very tightly scored and orchestrated, and written out, and people are handed the sheet music, and there's some that there was like a degree of improvisation was taking place. Like we had a TV with a film on it, and there were some sort of themes were elaborated and were improvising while the film is playing. So yeah, I'm trying to think if there's more to say about that, but like yeah, I mean that was a huge part. It was also like when that was after the film was shot, but it felt a very creative process, like working with those musicians, working with my brother.
I
So
think it kind of sets the tone right from the beginning. Almost you're thinking there's a horror aspect to what's going on in
yeah.
classic terms. It's got a classic horror soundtrack feel to it.
Yeah, absolutely. It feels supernatural. It feels like the soundtrack is opening the door to the supernatural. And it does mean, as a consequence of that, that people they're driven to interpret the film in a kind of like supernatural, metaphysical way,
Yeah.
which works for what actually ultimately happens.
It
You know?
really does work. Someone who's
Yeah,
a bit of a horror movie buff myself, there was
yeah,
lots of nice little touches throughout, I think, that kind of could lead
yeah,
that way, should you wish.
yeah. So it's not a horror per se, but that's a medium or a genre that I'm like very interested in working in some way. I'm not a blood and guts person,
So,
but I do like the sort of horror toolkit, you
yeah,
know.
yeah.
So
And it shot in Glasgow? Was it all locally done?
yeah, it's shot in a shop unit in Brigton.
All right, okay.
Yeah.
And how was it shot? Was it done very quickly, kind of, in and out, and then to the editing.
Fi- 5 days. It's 5 days shoot, which is that's very fast for feature.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Um,
what did you have a lot of footage to edit, or was it quite tight to begin with?
um, well, you have a script, so we are shooting the script. You've got, I think it's something like 65 scenes, which is the normal,
Right.
pretty much normal for a 90-minute film. And we shot 16 hours of footage over 5 days, which if you kind of, I hadn't particularly looked this up until I was quite close to the film of like what kind of amount of footage do you expect to shoot for a 90-minute film? And I think that is for a low budget film, that's fairly good.
Right.
If you're trying to make a 90-minute film and you've only got 90 minutes of rushes, then you're kind of struggling. But I think the shooting ratio of approximately 10 to 1, we were slightly better than 10 to 1. I think that's respectable for a low budget film. Low budget film is usually regarded as films that are up to about 3 million, and I can tell you we didn't have anything close. So
So, how did you approach that then? Did you just have the reality of, I think I can, because you mentioned earlier on, you thought I can do this that's nowhere near what people are calling low budget films, and I can. And, it certainly,
yeah,
delivers in that sense. But
yeah.
what are those realities? Do you have to cut corners, so to speak, or do you just have to be clear about what you're doing?
Where was the big savings? The time thing is a big saving. There was a lot of roles which I did myself.
Mhm.
Um, so the crew is very small. I did all the post-production, like editing, the grade, and the visual effects, the sort of offline, online, did all that myself. I did work with a producer and a sort of production manager in the final stages, but the first stages of production, I was doing everything myself. So there's saving right there. That's like all those things that no one's getting paid for. That's me. There were then my there were a few people who essentially like a lot of the crew, most of the crew were paid at like a fine rate, an okay rate. But my partner did the costumes and the production design. She didn't get paid. My brother, I mean, they are about to get paid because the film is actually in the process of making money,
Yeah,
and that money is going to them before it goes to me.
yeah,
Brother is also deferred payment, and just things like that.
I'm sure.
But it was more than anything else, it's the time and it's this thing of doing it in one location.
Yeah.
And I think it also is like these relationships that I've built, through shooting all these music videos with people who you have an efficient working method. Um, there are these kind of there are some favors which you can kind of draw upon by working through a production company who's regularly making commercials and music videos and things. But it wasn't like, that you definitely hear of short films where like nobody's getting paid and and none of this kind of stuff's happening. Like we were paying like actors the sort of equity rates and things. It's small, but I
Yeah.
think the speed is the real key to the cost being so low.
I
Yeah.
should say that it looks fantastic as well.
Yeah.
The interior of the tattoo studio, it's just that perfect mix of you can believe that he's been living there, but you can
Yeah.
also see these incredible designs which are on the walls.
Yeah.
Two examples behind your shoulder at the moment.
Yes.
Yeah, and on himself as well, you can kind
Yeah.
of see the work. So, to create all of that, and I think again, just to emphasize for people that all the um, things which were could be seen as constrictions, you've turned to positives, and it
Yeah.
works for every aspect of it, I think.
Yeah. I think, certain things like, when I'm talking about conceiving the story and saying this thing we're going to make, if you're making something with a small budget, it makes sense to shoot it in somewhere visually interesting.
Yeah,
If you're going to have limited locations. So yes, we do have all this crazy monster artwork all over the walls and it feels reasonable that tattoo parlors have crazy lighting. They do. They have neon lights and they have colored lights, and they're trying to make a visually interesting space. And it means that the film has this variety, this visual variety and depth. And yeah, so there's a lot of skill and talent, across the film in different roles, who are feeding into this thing, turning out as well as it did. I think, like, I would have told myself maybe 10 years ago that if I just had the chance, I could have done something like this. But it's not true because I didn't have the experience. I didn't have the connections with people to make this possible. So that's what it was. And like at this point, like I had, fairly not amazing, but I had some savings.
Mm.
And the thing that I wanted to do more than anything else in the world was make a film because it's like I don't want to, snuff it and never have given it a shot. And but I could feel like, with the cost of living crisis and everything, the value of that money in terms of it being able to make a film was like it was going down like every
Yeah,
week
sure.
because crew rates were going up and up, like because the cost of living was going up. So like, this is just sort of standard thing of like the value of people's money going down. But it's like this is just about enough for me to think I maybe can do this right now. But if I wait, it won't be. Like if I waited another year, I'd need more money to do this, you know.
So we
So
mentioned that it's going on tour.
yeah.
Where's the best place that people can find out about that?
At tummymonster.co.uk. So all the screenings are live there, and we are adding more as we get more. The sort of distribution model we're doing for this, I'm self-distributing it, but this is a huge, interesting conversation for people who are interested in it. But like how do you get films like this in front of audiences?
Yeah.
And traditionally, you have like a kind of you have your publicity push, and then you have a limited release window. And there are more films, particularly on the independent scene, that are self-distributing, and their cinema run it's longer. It's kind of it's maybe playing venues at shorter periods of time, but you're trying to gradually build word of mouth. So, we had a great screening in Glasgow. Fortunate to looks like we're coming back for more screenings because it went so well.
Right.
And that's what we're trying to do with everywhere we go. It's like you don't have the backing of a major distributor saying, we need you to put this on for 2 weeks, whatever. But you can build word of mouth, then gradually that builds up, and that's how you get films like this seen, I suppose.
And have you had any reactions from audiences? Because I know you've been doing some Q&As as well that have really surprised you.
Um, well, I think it's interesting that people can interpret the film in different ways because although it seems like a very simple thing, I've had people I'm not so surprised by this, but some people have said like, "Oh, this character, he's an angel. Is that right?" And they'll ask, "He's an angel." It's like
It's up
it's
to you.
not. I'm not going to say that's not necessarily how I view it, but like I'm not going to say, and people will say something like that to you. Someone else came to me and said, "This film is about cocaine addiction, right?" They said it, and they just said like, "Just be straight with me. That's what it's about, isn't it? It's about cocaine addiction." And that was a surprise.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, I guess it's a film without a doubt that you will bring yourself to it. There's no,
Yeah,
whatever it is, and whatever that might be, I don't think you can avoid doing that.
yeah. So yeah, that is interesting. People do take it in different ways, and like yeah, someone else was like, getting into a conversation with me about narcissists, and thinking that that's like my main perspective on it is like a sort of I don't know, like critique of the narcissistic personality. And again, I'm like, no, that's your thing.
Yeah, that's so interesting. Yeah.
So
And
yeah.
are you always planning ahead to the next thing? Have you got something you can tell us about? Is it all about Tummy Monster?
Well, at this point, I'm behind the tour. I mean, I want to be making more films and telling more stories, and I'm constantly thinking like, how do I use this film to do my next thing? And I think that's what it's done. It has started those conversations, and it's kind of opened doors for that happening. It's never going to be totally straightforward, but yeah, there's a number of things are in the works. So hopefully it won't be too long before the next one comes along. So
Well, Ciaran, all the best with the tour of Tummy Monster. I really enjoyed it, watched it into the wee small hours last night.
yeah,
And all the best for the future as well. Lovely to talk to you.
thanks so much. Thank
And
you.
we'll be back soon with someone completely different.